November 20th, 1943, Betio Island, Tarawa Atoll. The morning sun climbs over the Pacific, turning the lagoon into a sheet of molten copper. Private First Class Robert Miller crouches in a landing craft, gripping his M1 Garand so tightly his knuckles have gone white. Around him, 72 Marines breathe shallow, mechanical breaths. The smell of salt water mixes with diesel fumes and fear sweat. Nobody speaks. Ahead, through the morning haze, Betio rises from the sea like a jagged scar, 500 yards long, 300 yards wide. A coral airstrip the Japanese have transformed into something biblical. 4,000 defenders behind reinforced concrete walls 3 feet thick, machine gun nests carved into coconut log bunkers strong enough to deflect battleship shells. Barbed wire strung across every approach like steel spiderwebs designed to trap and bleed. Intelligence briefed them yesterday. The bombardment will level everything, they said. Walk ashore, they promised. Miller doesn't believe it. Neither does anyone else in this boat. The first wave hits the reef at 0900 hours. Disaster unfolds immediately. The tide is wrong. Landing craft scrape coral and stick fast, 500 yards from shore. Marines pour over the sides into chest-deep water, holding rifles overhead, wading toward an island that has suddenly come alive with fire. Japanese Type 92 heavy machine guns open up from concealed positions. The water around Miller explodes into white geysers. Men vanish beneath the surface. Blood spreads in dark clouds. He keeps moving because stopping means dying. Bullets snap past his helmet. His breath comes in ragged gasps. 50 yards, 40, 30. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Miller drags himself onto the seawall, collapsing behind a shattered coconut log. His hands shake violently. Around him, Marines cluster in whatever cover they can find, pinned down, exposed. The carefully planned assault has become a killing field measured in inches. Ahead, rising from the sand like tombstones, stand the pillboxes. Concrete bunkers with walls 5 feet thick, steel-reinforced firing slits barely 8 inches wide. Each one commands overlapping fields of fire that turn the beach into a mathematical equation of death. Marines who try to advance are cut down before they reach 10 yards. Sergeant Thomas Hayes crawls up beside Miller, sand crusted across his face. "We can't stay here," he shouts over the gunfire. "And we can't go forward," Miller yells back. Hayes stares at the nearest pillbox, machine gun tracers streaming from its firing port. "Then we need something those bunkers can't handle." What Hayes doesn't know yet is that something is already coming ashore, carried by men who look more like pack mules than soldiers. The M2 Flamethrower. 70 pounds of pressurized fuel and ignition system strapped to a Marine's back. A weapon the Japanese have never encountered, a weapon that will turn concrete fortresses into crematoriums in less than 60 seconds. The concept of portable flame weapons had emerged from the brutal lessons of trench warfare in the First World War. German Flammenwerfer units had demonstrated the psychological and tactical value of fire as a weapon. But the technology remained crude, heavy, unreliable, dangerous to the operator. By 1938, the United States Chemical Warfare Service began serious development of a portable flamethrower that could be carried and operated by a single soldier. The M1 flamethrower entered service in 1941, but combat testing in the Pacific revealed critical flaws. The fuel mixture burned too quickly. The range was insufficient. The ignition system failed under humid tropical conditions. Marines who used the M1 at Guadalcanal reported that Japanese defenders could simply wait for the flame burst to end, then counterattack before the operator could reload. Captain Andrew Wilson of the Chemical Warfare Service reviewed these after-action reports with growing frustration. The weapon had potential, but it needed fundamental redesign. He assembled a team of engineers at Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland with a single mandate: create a flamethrower that could neutralize fortified positions from beyond grenade-throwing distance while remaining light enough for infantry use. The M2 flamethrower emerged from 9 months of intensive development. The weapon consisted of 2 cylindrical fuel tanks mounted in a backpack frame connected to a trigger-operated gun mechanism via flexible hoses. The fuel tanks held 4 gallons of thickened gasoline, a mixture of standard petroleum fuel, combined with a soap-based thickening agent that increased burn time and adhesion to surfaces. The ignition system represented the most significant improvement over the M1 model. Rather than relying on an external pilot light that could be extinguished by wind or dampness, the M2 used a cartridge-based ignition similar to a shotgun shell. Each time the operator pulled the trigger, a small explosive charge ignited the fuel stream at the gun nozzle, ensuring reliable flame generation even in adverse conditions. Lieutenant James Harrison commanded the first flamethrower team deployed to Tarawa. His unit, a specialized squad of 12 Marines, had trained for 6 weeks at Camp Pendleton with the newly issued M2 systems. The training emphasized tactical employment rather than just mechanical operation, how to approach fortified positions using terrain masking, how to coordinate with rifle squads for suppressive fire, how to manage the psychological burden of carrying a weapon that made you a priority target. Harrison's men understood the mathematics of their situation. The M2 had an effective range of 35 to 40 yards under optimal conditions. Japanese machine guns could kill at 300 yards. The flamethrower operator would need to cross 260 yards of killing ground to reach effective range. Without infantry support, without smoke cover, without perfect timing, the flamethrower teams would be annihilated before firing a single burst. The fuel mixture used in the M2 represented a careful balance between burning temperature and duration. Pure gasoline burned too quickly, creating impressive flames that lacked the sustained heat necessary to penetrate fortified positions. The thickened fuel, developed through chemical experimentation at Edgewood Arsenal, burned at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 8 to 10 seconds per burst. The mixture adhered to concrete, wood, and human flesh, creating fires that could not be easily extinguished. Private Daniel Chen carried the M2 flamethrower in Harrison's squad. At 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighing 140 pounds, Chen barely met the minimum physical requirements for flamethrower duty. But during training, he had demonstrated exceptional calm under pressure and an intuitive understanding of flame projection mechanics. He could estimate range within 5 yards without instruments and could compensate for wind conditions that would throw off less experienced operators. The tactical doctrine for flamethrower employment emphasized surprise and violence of action. The weapon's limited fuel capacity, enough for approximately 10 bursts of 3 to 4 seconds each, meant that operators could not afford to waste ammunition on suppressive fire. Each burst needed to count. Each target needed to be precisely identified before the operator moved within effective range. The M2's gun mechanism weighed 14 pounds and extended 33 inches from the operator's hands to the nozzle tip. The weapon was front-heavy, requiring significant upper body strength to maintain accurate aim during extended operations. The trigger assembly featured a safety mechanism that prevented accidental discharge, but combat experience would later show that Marines often disabled the safety to reduce reaction time when under fire. Japanese defensive doctrine at Tarawa had been developed through careful study of American amphibious assault tactics. The fortifications on Betio Island represented months of engineering work, with particular attention paid to creating mutually supporting strongpoints that could engage attackers from multiple angles simultaneously. The pillboxes were constructed using coconut logs, steel plates, and reinforced concrete in layers that could absorb tremendous punishment. The typical pillbox on Betio measured 12 feet wide by 8 feet deep, with walls ranging from 3 to 5 feet thick. The firing aperture was positioned to maximize fields of fire while minimizing exposure to counter-battery artillery. Interior chambers provided space for ammunition storage, relief crew quarters, and emergency egress tunnels that connected to adjacent positions. The Japanese defenders had transformed Betio into an integrated fortress system that military planners considered nearly impregnable to frontal assault. Lieutenant Colonel David Shoup, commanding 2nd Marine Regiment, studied the defensive positions through binoculars from his command post on Red Beach 2. The morning assault had become a nightmare. Casualties exceeded 30% in some companies, Marines huddled behind seawalls and wrecked landing craft unable to advance against the concentrated fire from pillboxes that had survived the preliminary bombardment intact. Shoup grabbed his radio handset. "Get Harrison's flame teams forward, now!" The order carried the weight of desperation. Conventional weapons had failed. Artillery couldn't crack the fortifications. Direct assault produced only corpses. The flamethrowers represented the last option before the entire operation collapsed into catastrophic failure. Harrison received the order at 10:30 hours. He gathered his squad behind a destroyed Amtrak, its hull still smoking from a direct hit. "Listen up," he shouted over the gunfire. "We're going after the pillboxes on the western approach. Chen, your primary operator. Roberts, your backup. Everyone else provides security and suppression." Private Chen adjusted the straps on his M2 flamethrower, distributing the 70-pound load across his shoulders and hips. The fuel tanks pressed against his back, warm from the tropical sun. He checked the ignition cartridge magazine, confirmed the trigger mechanism operated smoothly, then met Harrison's eyes. "Ready, sir?" The approach to the first pillbox required crossing 30 yards of open beach, swept by machine gun fire from multiple positions. Harrison coordinated with a rifle platoon to provide suppressing fire while the flame team maneuvered. On his signal, 20 Marines opened up simultaneously, stitching the pillbox firing slits with rifle and automatic weapons fire. The volume of incoming bullets forced the Japanese defenders to pull back momentarily from their firing ports. Chen sprinted forward, crouched low, legs pumping through loose sand that grabbed at his boots. 20 yards, 15. Machine gun fire erupted again, bullets snapping past his head. He dove behind a coral outcropping, breath coming in gasps, adrenaline singing in his veins. The pillbox loomed ahead, its concrete walls scarred by artillery strikes, but fundamentally intact. Harrison and 2 riflemen reached Chen's position seconds later. "Rifle grenades," Harrison ordered. The Marines loaded grenades and fired at the pillbox firing slit. The explosions created smoke and dust that temporarily obscured the Japanese defenders' vision. "Now, Chen, go!" Chen rose and charged the final 15 yards. His world narrowed to the pillbox firing aperture and the gun mechanism in his hands. He could see movement inside the bunker, shadows shifting behind the concrete walls. At 10 yards, he planted his feet, aimed the nozzle, and pulled the trigger. The cartridge ignited with a sharp crack. A stream of burning fuel erupted from the gun nozzle, arcing through the air like liquid lightning. The flame struck the pillbox firing slit and poured inside, filling the confined space with fire that reached temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The thickened fuel splashed against concrete walls and adhered to every surface, creating an inferno that consumed oxygen faster than human lungs could replace it. The Japanese machine gun crew died in seconds. Screams erupted from inside the bunker, then choked off as superheated air seared lungs and toxic smoke displaced breathable atmosphere. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition stored inside the pillbox cooked off in the heat, sending flames shooting from the firing port like a blast furnace. Chen held the trigger for 4 seconds, then released. The entire engagement from trigger pull to complete neutralization had lasted less than 10 seconds. The pillbox that had pinned down an entire company of Marines for over an hour fell silent. Smoke poured from every opening. The firing slit that had spit death across Red Beach now vomited only flames and ash. Marines, watching from the seawall, stared in stunned disbelief. Miller grabbed Haze's shoulder. "Did you see that? Did you see that?" Haze nodded slowly, unable to form words. The pillbox they had considered impregnable, the fortress that artillery couldn't crack, had been eliminated in seconds by a single Marine with a flame weapon. Harrison waved his team forward. "Next target, keep moving." But the tactical situation had already changed. Japanese defenders in adjacent pillboxes had witnessed the destruction of their neighboring position. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that their concrete fortifications offered no protection against this new American weapon. Fear, that most human of emotions, began to crack the discipline that had made them such formidable defenders. The second pillbox assault followed the same pattern. Suppressive fire from supporting infantry, rapid maneuver by the flame team, Chen closing to effective range, while Japanese bullets kicked up sand around his boots. The flame burst pouring through the firing slit. The screams, the silence. The fortress transformed into a tomb in under 60 seconds. By noon, Harrison's flame teams had eliminated 7 pillboxes across Red Beach 2. Each one fell with mechanical efficiency. The Marines developed a rhythm. Identify target, coordinate suppression, maneuver flame operator, engage, confirm kill, move to next objective. The weapon that military planners had considered experimental proved devastatingly effective against fortifications that conventional weapons could not touch. Private Chen's flamethrower ran dry after the 8th engagement. He had expended all 40 gallons of fuel across 10 individual flame bursts. Roberts took over as primary operator, carrying a fresh M2 unit. The supply chain had been established with reserve fuel tanks staged at the seawall and flamethrower operators rotating through as their weapons exhausted ammunition. The psychological impact of the flamethrowers rippled through both sides. American Marines who had been pinned down for hours suddenly found themselves able to advance as pillboxes fell silent, one after another. Japanese defenders faced a nightmare scenario. Their strongest fortifications, the concrete bunkers they had trusted with their lives, offered no protection against flames that could flow through firing slits and incinerate everything inside. Colonel Shoup received reports throughout the afternoon. Flame teams clearing the western sector, flame teams advancing on the airfield perimeter, flame teams neutralizing bunker complex 7 Alpha. Each report marked another pillbox eliminated, another strongpoint captured, another yard of beach secured. The weapon that had been an afterthought in pre-invasion planning had become the critical enabler of success. By 1600 hours, the marine perimeter had expanded from a precarious toehold to a defensible beachhead. The advance was measured in hundreds of yards rather than feet. Casualties that had been catastrophic in the morning assault dropped significantly as pillboxes fell to flamethrowers rather than costly infantry charges. The mathematics of the battle had shifted decisively in American favor. The afternoon sun beat down on Betio Island with merciless intensity. Smoke from burning pillboxes drifted across the battlefield in thick, oily clouds that stung the eyes and coated the throat. Private Chen sat with his back against a destroyed Japanese bunker, hands trembling as he tried to light a cigarette. The flamethrower unit lay beside him. Fuel tanks empty, the metal still warm to the touch. Lieutenant Harrison dropped down next to him, offering a canteen. "Drink slow," he said quietly. Chen nodded, taking small sips of water that tasted like metal and coral dust. Around them, Marines consolidated positions, dragged wounded to aid stations and prepared for the next phase of the assault. The battle for Tarawa was far from over, but the character of the fight had fundamentally changed. Sergeant Haze gathered his squad near the seawall to brief them on the afternoon's objectives. "We're pushing toward the airfield," he announced, pointing inland where the skeletal framework of the Japanese runway stretched across the island's interior. "Intel says there's a bunker complex protecting the southern approach, reinforced concrete, multiple firing positions, probably 100 defenders." The Marines absorbed this information with grim faces. Before the flamethrowers, such an announcement would have meant certain death for half the men in the assault wave. Now it meant a difficult fight, but a winnable one. The presence of Harrison's flame teams had transformed impossible objectives into merely dangerous ones. Private Miller checked his rifle, ejecting the magazine to verify it was fully loaded before slapping it back into the receiver. His hands had stopped shaking an hour ago. Combat had a way of burning through fear and replacing it with a cold mechanical focus. He had watched Chen incinerate that first pillbox, had seen the flames pour through the firing slit like the wrath of an angry god, and something in him had shifted. The Japanese weren't invincible. Their fortresses could burn. The advance toward the airfield began at 1400 hours. 3 companies of Marines moved in coordinated bounds, using destroyed vehicles and shell craters for cover as they pushed inland. Japanese snipers harassed them from hidden positions, and occasional mortar rounds fell among the advancing troops, but the devastating machine gun fire from fortified pillboxes had largely been silenced. Harrison's flame teams had broken the spine of the defensive network. The bunker complex protecting the airfield's southern perimeter was larger and more sophisticated than the pillboxes on the beach. This was a command and control center, housing communication equipment, ammunition stores, and a garrison of elite Japanese naval infantry. The structure had been built using layers of coconut logs, steel plates, and reinforced concrete that created walls nearly 6 feet thick. Intelligence photographs showed at least 4 separate firing positions with interlocking fields of fire that could sweep the entire approach. Colonel Shoup studied the complex through binoculars, calculating angles of attack and likely casualties. Standard doctrine called for preparatory artillery bombardment followed by infantry assault, but the morning's experience had taught him that artillery alone couldn't crack these fortifications. He reached for his radio. "Get me Harrison's flame teams. We're going to need them up front." Lieutenant Harrison received the order while his squad was refueling their M2 flamethrowers from reserve tanks brought forward by supply teams. Private Roberts had taken over as primary operator after Chen exhausted his fuel load. But Chen insisted on remaining with the squad to provide security and tactical advice. The bond between flamethrower operators and their supporting riflemen had grown extraordinarily tight throughout the day's fighting. They had learned to trust each other absolutely, because mistakes meant death for everyone. The tactical problem facing Harrison was more complex than the beach pillbox assaults. The bunker complex's multiple firing positions meant that suppressing fire from a single rifle platoon wouldn't be sufficient. The flame team would need coordinated support from at least 2 infantry companies, plus smoke cover to mask their approach, plus artillery fire to keep defenders' heads down during the critical final yards. Harrison gathered his team leaders and sketched a plan in the sand using a stick. "We hit them from 2 directions simultaneously. Chen takes the eastern firing position. Roberts takes the western. We advance under smoke, use artillery to suppress, then burn them out before they can react." He looked up at his men. "Timing is everything. If we're not coordinated, they'll cut us down before we're in range." The artillery preparation began at 1500 hours. Marine 75mm pack howitzers, positioned just behind the beachhead, opened fire on the bunker complex with high explosive shells. The bombardment wasn't intended to destroy the fortifications, but rather to force defenders away from firing ports and create dust and smoke that would obscure visibility. Each shell impact sent geysers of coral and sand skyward, gradually building a curtain of particulate matter that drifted across the target area. Simultaneously, infantry mortar teams fired white phosphorus rounds that burst into clouds of dense white smoke. The combination of artillery dust and phosphorus smoke created a visual barrier that reduced visibility to less than 20 yards. Under this cover, Harrison's flame teams began their approach, moving in short rushes from cover to cover, always staying low, always staying aware of the Japanese positions ahead. Private Chen moved with his squad on the eastern flank, his M1 Garand held at the ready. Though he wasn't carrying the flamethrower anymore, his experience as an operator made him invaluable for identifying optimal firing positions and approach routes. He could read terrain the way a flamethrower needed to read it, understanding which angles provided the best opportunity for flame penetration and which approaches would expose the operator to concentrated fire. Roberts, carrying the 70-pound M2 unit on his back, followed Chen's lead. The weight made him move slower than the riflemen, but his squad adjusted their pace to match. They understood that Roberts was their ticket to victory. Without the flamethrower, they would be trying to charge machine gun nests with rifles and grenades, trading bodies for yards. With the flamethrower, they could eliminate fortified positions in seconds with minimal friendly casualties. The smokescreen began to thin as they approached the bunker complex. Chen could see the dark outline of the eastern firing position through gaps in the white phosphorus haze. The concrete structure was massive, easily twice the size of the beach pillboxes they had eliminated earlier. Multiple firing slits indicated overlapping fields of fire, and the entrance was protected by a chicane barrier that prevented direct assault. Japanese defenders opened fire through the smoke, machine gun bursts walking across the approach route in search of targets. Bullets cracked overhead, forcing Marines to hug the ground. A corporal 10 yards to Chen's left took a round through the shoulder and collapsed with a strangled cry. Navy corpsmen crawled forward to drag him to cover, working under fire with the kind of courage that never made headlines, but saved countless lives. Chen identified a shell crater 20 yards from the bunker's eastern firing slit. "Roberts, that's your position," he shouted over the gunfire. "You can hit the aperture from there." Roberts nodded, adjusting his grip on the M2's gun mechanism. The two men exchanged a look that communicated everything words couldn't: trust, fear, determination, the understanding that in the next 60 seconds, one or both of them might die. The supporting rifle squad opened up with everything they had, pouring suppressive fire into the bunker's firing slits. Tracers from Browning automatic rifles sparked against concrete. M1 rifles cracked in steady rhythm. The volume of fire forced Japanese defenders to pull back momentarily from their positions, creating a brief window of opportunity. "Go! Go! Go! Go!" Chen yelled. Roberts surged forward, legs pumping, the flamethrower bouncing against his back. 15 yards. 10. A machine gun burst erupted from the bunker, bullets kicking up sand directly in front of Roberts. He dove into the shell crater, landing hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. Chen and two riflemen sprinted to join him, sliding into the crater as more fire snapped overhead. Roberts gasped for air, hands shaking as he positioned the M2's gun mechanism. The bunker firing slit was barely visible through the drifting smoke, a dark rectangle against grey concrete. 10 yards away, well within effective range. He could see movement inside, shadows of defenders repositioning after the suppressive fire. His finger found the trigger. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The ignition cartridge fired with its characteristic crack. Flame erupted from the nozzle, a stream of burning fuel that arced across the 10 yards separating Roberts from the bunker. The thickened gasoline struck the firing slit and poured inside, splashing against walls and equipment and human beings. The temperature inside the confined space climbed instantly to over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The screams lasted perhaps 5 seconds before the fire consumed all available oxygen. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition cooked off, sending flames jetting from every opening in the bunker. Roberts held the trigger for a full 5 seconds, ensuring complete coverage, then released. Smoke and flame poured from the eastern firing position like a chimney. The machine gun that had been spitting death across the approach fell permanently silent. On the western flank, Private Wilson executed an identical assault on the bunker's opposite firing position. His flame burst caught a group of Japanese defenders as they were attempting to reposition a Type 92 heavy machine gun. The weapon, capable of shredding attacking infantry at 300 yards, became a useless piece of metal as its crew died in flames that adhered to skin and clothing, and could not be extinguished. The bunker complex that had been designated as a primary defensive strongpoint fell in less than 3 minutes. 2 flame bursts totaling 9 seconds of actual burning time had eliminated a position that conventional assault would have required hours to capture and cost dozens of American lives. The Marines, who had been pinned down by the bunker's fire, suddenly found themselves able to advance, pushing toward the airfield perimeter as Japanese resistance collapsed. Lieutenant Harrison coordinated the consolidation of captured positions, ensuring that Marines occupied the bunkers and established defensive positions before any counterattack could develop. His flame teams had expended most of their fuel, with only enough remaining for perhaps 2 or 3 more engagements. Supply lines were stretched thin, and getting fresh fuel tanks forward through the congested beachhead would take time. Colonel Shoup received Harrison's report at his command post and immediately ordered priority resupply for the flame teams. The weapon had proven its worth beyond any doubt. In a single day's fighting, flamethrowers had eliminated more fortified positions than 3 days of preliminary bombardment and conventional assault combined. The tactical implications were profound and would reshape Marine Corps doctrine for the remainder of the Pacific War. By 1700 hours, Marines controlled the southern half of Betio Island. The airfield, the primary objective of the assault, was secure. Japanese defenders had been pushed back into a shrinking perimeter on the island's northern tip, where final desperate resistance would continue for 2 more days. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The flamethrowers had broken the back of the Japanese defense. Private Chen sat in the shade of a destroyed aircraft hangar, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. Around him, his squad rested, 8K rations, and tried not to think about the friends who hadn't survived the day. Tarawa had cost the 2nd Marine Division over 1,000 killed and more than 2,000 wounded in 76 hours of fighting. The casualty rate was horrific by any standard, but it would have been far worse without the M2 flamethrowers. Harrison approached Chen and sat down beside him. Neither man spoke for a long moment. Finally, the lieutenant said quietly, "You saved a lot of lives today." Chen looked up, his young face aged by combat. "We all did, sir. That's why we're here." The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of orange and purple. Navy corpsmen worked tirelessly in aid stations, treating wounded Marines with morphine and sulfur powder and prayer. Graves registration teams began the grim task of collecting American dead from the beaches and inland positions. Each body was treated with dignity, dog tags collected, personal effects secured for shipment home to families who would never fully understand what their sons and husbands and brothers had endured. Japanese defenders in the northern pocket launched a series of desperate counterattacks as darkness fell. They knew their situation was hopeless, that reinforcement was impossible, that surrender was culturally unthinkable. Some charged American positions with rifles and bayonets, others detonated grenades while embracing Marines in final acts of suicidal defiance. A few simply walked into machine gun fire, choosing death on their own terms rather than capture. The Marines met these attacks with disciplined fire, cutting down assaulters before they could reach friendly lines. There was no joy in the killing, no triumph in the slaughter, just the cold necessity of survival and the understanding that this was how the Pacific War would be fought, island by island, yard by yard, until one side or the other could no longer continue. November the 21st dawned, grey and humid. The smell of death hung over Betio Island, a sickly, sweet odor that no amount of sea breeze could dispel. Marines pushed into the northern pocket, clearing the last Japanese positions with grenades, rifles, and flamethrowers. By afternoon, organized resistance had ceased. Small groups of defenders continued to fight from spider holes and coconut log bunkers, but the battle's outcome was decided. Colonel Shoup walked the battlefield with his staff, surveying the destruction. Hundreds of Japanese bunkers and pillboxes lay in ruins, their concrete walls scorched black by flamethrower attacks. Inside, the charred remains of defenders who had believed their fortifications were impregnable. Shoup stopped at one particularly massive bunker that had been hit by multiple flame bursts. The walls were 6 feet thick, the construction representing months of engineering work. It had fallen in less than a minute. "This changes everything," Shoup said to his operations officer. "The Japanese built these islands into fortresses. They thought concrete and steel would stop us." He gestured at the burned-out bunker. "But you can't hide from fire. It flows through every opening, fills every space. Their strongest defenses became their tombs." The tactical lessons from Tarawa spread rapidly through the Marine Corps. After-action reports emphasized the critical importance of flamethrowers in reducing fortified positions. Training programs were expanded to create more flamethrower teams. Supply chains were restructured to ensure adequate fuel reserves for amphibious operations. The M2 flamethrower, which had been considered a specialized weapon of limited utility, became a standard component of Marine infantry battalions. Private Chen rotated off Betio Island on November 23rd, boarding a transport ship that would carry his unit back to Hawaii for rest and refit. He stood at the rail, watching the island recede into the distance. Smoke still rose from scattered fires. The palm trees that had once covered the atoll had been reduced to charcoal stumps. The turquoise lagoon was littered with wrecked landing craft and floating debris. He thought about the pillboxes he had burned, the defenders who had died in flames. There was no satisfaction in those memories, no sense of accomplishment, just the weight of having done what needed to be done, of having survived when so many others hadn't. The M2 flamethrower had been horrifyingly effective. It had saved American lives by the hundreds. And it had introduced a new dimension of terror into warfare that would haunt both sides for years to come. Military historians would later analyze the Battle of Tarawa and identify the flamethrower as the decisive weapon that enabled American victory. Without the ability to neutralize fortified positions quickly and efficiently, Marine casualties would have been unsustainable. The operation might have been abandoned or required weeks of grinding attrition warfare that would have bled the 2nd Marine Division white. Instead, the M2 flamethrower cleared pillboxes in under 60 seconds, just as the title promised. It transformed concrete fortresses into crematoriums. It gave Marines a weapon that could crack Japanese defenses that conventional artillery and infantry assault could not touch. And it established a tactical template that would be repeated across every contested island from Tarawa to Okinawa. The Japanese learned their lesson too late. After Tarawa, they modified defensive tactics to account for flamethrowers, building bunkers with multiple entrances, and improved ventilation to disperse flames. But the fundamental vulnerability remained. Fire could not be stopped by concrete walls. It flowed like water, filling every space, consuming everything combustible, including human beings. The legacy of Tarawa's flamethrower teams lived on in the memories of the men who survived. Chen would carry his experiences for the rest of his life, never speaking of them, except to fellow veterans who understood. Harrison would receive the Navy Cross for his leadership during the battle, though he never felt he deserved recognition for doing what duty required. Roberts would be killed on Saipan 8 months later, operating a flamethrower during the assault on Japanese cave positions. The M2 flamethrower itself would be refined and improved throughout the war, eventually evolving into the M2A1 model with increased range and fuel capacity. But the basic design that proved so effective at Tarawa remained essentially unchanged. It was a simple weapon. Fuel tanks, ignition system, gun mechanism, trigger, nothing sophisticated, nothing that required advanced technology or complex training. Just fire, humanity's oldest weapon applied with devastating efficiency to modern warfare. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.